we have a vision here to create what we're calling the FEMTIC, which is an accredited list of trusted providers that founders in women's health, femtech and sexual wellbeing can go to and know that there won't be bias when they're being serviced, and they will know that they have the confidence and the trust in those service providers because they've got policies that don't categorize them as porn adjacent or too risky to do business with, and that they have the cultural openness to understand what women's health is all about.
Some investments chase returns, others shift reality. Welcome to Blindspot Capital, the show where we trace the capital flows, structural decisions, and invisible forces shaping the future of health. We go deep on what's overlooked, underfunded, or misunderstood, especially where women's health, longevity, and AI intersect. Because this isn't just about the next big trend, it's about who gets seen and who gets funded. So welcome back to Blindspot Capital, where we decode what gets funded, what gets forgotten, and why. I'm your host, Maryann. Now, before we begin, if you're new here or you've been following quietly, then take a second to hit that subscribe button and share this episode. The more ears we reach, the fewer blind spots get to stay hidden. Now, today's episode is close to home. It's uncomfortable, but it's well overdue. Now, imagine building a company to address endometriosis or pelvic pain. You're finally getting traction. And then your post on social media gets removed or flagged, or worse, shadow banned. Not because it's false, but because it's about women's bodies. Now, that's not a dystopian warning. That's what's happening. And my guest today decided to do something about it. I've got with me in the studio Anna O'Sullivan, and she is the founder of FutureFemHealth, an industry newsletter that's dedicated to the world of women's health innovation and femtech, with more than 8,000 subscribers. But today we're here to talk about her other platform, Censorship, a movement that she's co-founded to challenge exactly the problem that we've just talked about, this routine censorship of women's health content across social media. Now, Anna and her team ran a survey, and they found that 9 out of 10 women's health brands, educators, or clinicians have experienced some sort of suppression online. And just this week, they've launched a white paper summarizing over 15 months of research and have filed 6 formal complaints under the EU Digital Services Act. Anna, it's great to have you on the podcast today.
Maryann, thank you so much for having me, and brilliant to have this platform to talk about the work with censorship.
Absolutely. So let's just dive in. Maybe take us back to the beginning. Do you remember the moment when you sort of first realized that, wait, this isn't a glitch? Women's health content is actually being treated online differently.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was through my work on FutureFemHealth as setting up the industry newsletter and my interest there in all of these systemic issues and barriers within the women's health sector. And I was used to hearing about the funding gap and the data gap and the research gap. And then it was hearing about the content censorship that was happening. And as you outlined so brilliantly at the start, the accurate medically reviewed content about, say, endometriosis or miscarriage, which is getting flagged as inappropriate or sensitive, and then it's removed or restricted on social media. And it clicked for me that if we're going to see the women's health sector succeed and grow to this estimated, 60 billion plus industry within the next few years, how can that happen if this is happening to the content online? And so I really wanted to, emphasize this is not just a content issue. This is a real structural barrier that's in place for the women's health sector. And alongside this, I met Cleo Wood, who is my co-founder on the Censorship platform. And Cleo is a journalist and author and has a very successful retreats business as well. And she'd experienced this personally with her own content. She would share a reel about body positivity, perhaps in a bikini, for example, as a mum of 2, and was having her content shadow banned or removed. And so we got talking, and that's where the idea for Censorship was born. And we couldn't have really predicted what we'd uncover.
Yeah.
As you said, our first survey, which has now heard from over 100 organizations, roundtable with some founders and charities. We've had our research published in national media on this issue. We've submitted 6 formal complaints to the EU's Digital Services Act, as you mentioned, and then the white paper, which was released this week alongside our open letter, which has just exploded on social media, to be quite honest. We've had over 500 people sign that open letter now, which is leaders within the women's health sector, but it's organizations, charities, content creators, and individuals who want to support this. And, I'd say every day we're now being approached by founders, charities, the media, all wanting to discuss and be involved in what we've created with censorship. And the voices are just too loud for us not to continue this work.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned, your survey found that 9 in 10, that's a lot. 9 in 10 women's health creators face censorship, and your co-founder also faced it personally herself. I mean, let's break that down. What exactly are the platforms flagging? And do they give a reason? And if so, what sort of reasons do they give?
Yes, absolutely. So when we talk about censorship, what we're looking at is really the algorithms that control what content is shown and amplified on social media, what you see in your feed.
Mm-hmm.
It's how the algorithms show that content and moderate that content. So we look at both it's the language, so it's the specific words that are being used within posts, but also within perhaps on the text of a reel, for example. And it's also the imagery. So, if you're trying to show a breastfeeding image, then that can quite easily be flagged.
Breastfeeding is pretty normal.
Yes, absolutely. The reason for this is that there's 2 reasons. There's one, which is the practicalities of the algorithms, which say, no adult content, no porn online, no sexualized content. And quite simply, women's health and women's bodies get categorized quite easily into that, which is why a breastfeeding image will be categorized as sexual content or porn, unfortunately. And this is happening because of the way the algorithms have been developed and trained with biased content. It's because of the moderation that's happening of the content. It's quite simply mistakes that happen where good medically verified content is being flagged and removed, even though it really shouldn't. And so it's partly this bias enforcement that's happening and partly because of the practicalities of the algorithm itself.
I want to talk a little bit about the human cost, because there are people behind this post and the intentions are good. We're talking about clinicians. We're talking about founders, educator. What does this do to the people behind the post? What's the emotional toll? Because you're being silenced in a way. What is the emotional toll of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So perhaps I can bring it to life through an example of a founder that is one of our case studies. So Bayer Fertility is a at-home insemination kit, a very important innovation that allows individuals and couples to hopefully start their families, and to do that within the comfort of their own homes at a much reduced price compared to going down the IVF route, for example. They wanted to reach their audience on Amazon, which is another platform that we've identified where there's issues with censorship. And they put a lot of work into their Amazon storefront on there to become a premium seller. And then within the description of the storefront, they wanted to describe what the kit could do. You use it by inserting the kit through the vaginal canal. Now, the word vaginal was not allowed by Amazon to be used. The word semen was fine for the male side of things. And the only alternative that they could use was birth canal, which, as you can imagine, for a fertility kit to have to use the phrase birth canal to describe their product was really insensitive to people that were facing fertility issues. And when we talk about the emotional toll, this involved what we typically hear from the founders is that it's so much back and forth with the platforms. There are very few avenues to challenge issues. We've seen founders challenging menopause content that's been banned on LinkedIn, for example, and being told that we need to have a professional standard for the content that's on there. And so it can become really demoralizing, exhausting. And when you look at all the other challenges that perhaps you face, not only as a founder, but specifically as a founder in women's health and a female founder typically as well, it can really compound on top of all of those issues.
So this week you've released this white paper that captures more than 15 months of research. You filed formal complaints. That's huge. Now, what were some of the most shocking, for example, or consistent patterns that emerged in that data?
Yes. So what I guess we found was that 9 in 10, or in fact, I think the latest figure is that 95% of the respondents have said that they've experienced censorship on social media. This is an ongoing pattern. So 4 in 10 have said that they've experienced 10 or more issues in the space of a year.
Wow.
So there's the real pattern side of things. I think another issue is the avenues to challenge the decisions as well. So if you do have content that's removed or restricted, there's very few ways that you can challenge that. You don't have a specific account manager unless you're spending, a lot of money with the social platforms. You wouldn't have a specific person that you can contact. And often when you'll challenge it, perhaps you might be told that it was a mistake and your content's reinstated, but often you don't really get a reason back. The terms and conditions that you see on the social media platforms are typically quite vague and opaque. So they don't give founders that clarity for the decision making either. So one of the key examples we've seen is that the guidelines say specifically, for example, that you can't place ads that are focused on sexual pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Yet on the male side, premature ejaculation is actually identified as something that you can advertise. And if you go into the Facebook ads library, which anyone can do, it's a public access Facebook ads library, you can see all of these ads for premature ejaculation and Viagra and all of these products that promote, here's how to get spontaneous sex back on track. And that to me is specifically about sexual pleasure. And yet on the female side, one of our case studies, Hanks, which sells a female libido product specifically for use during the menopause period, they have had so many issues with trying to promote and share that product on social media. It's really jarring for founders to see that hypocrisy and to be able to challenge it when the guidelines are fairly vague and are being misapplied, really.
Now, Anna, you launched your survey because I remember seeing it also earlier in the year where these practices were laid bare. And I remember at the time there was quite some media attention to that. There was public outrage. I saw that also myself. But I think despite the media attention, despite the public outrage, this censorship still happens. Why do you think that is? I mean, is it just algorithmic failure or is there something deeper going on here?
There would need to be a number of changes for us to see these barriers removed. So one is the really deeply ingrained, as I've said, the sexualization of the female body, where talking about the female body is sexualized. And that makes it very difficult when it comes to the social media content because it's just categorized into that. The other areas that need to change is that the moderation policies need to be applied more fairly and objectively. And so part of that is on the social media platforms to really invest into this area. And they recognize that there's a problem. They do. It's a prioritization issue to really look at how can we, in a very nuanced way, look at identifying content by the context it's within. So we've heard, for example, on TikTok that creators that might label their videos as sex education have a much easier time with that content, that it might not be removed because the platform can recognize that it's in the context of sex education. And so it's about looking at what you can do on each platform. But part of this is for the platforms to solve themselves and to really protect women's health content.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk a little bit about your journey with censorship. And I think since launching censorship with your co-founder, what has been perhaps the most unexpected form of support or maybe resistance that you've encountered?
I think that we've seen an overwhelming level of support for this. As I mentioned, it's been quite incredible how much the movement has taken on. And I think a lot of people perhaps thought that it was just affecting them individually, and that they weren't able to produce content that was getting approved, and that it was something to do with their skills.
Yeah.
And so by surfacing this and bringing people together in a single voice, it's just really created that powerful movement. So the support has been fantastic. Also a shout out to the Case for Her, Sweden, who we've partnered with on this and have just been such an incredible support to us as an organisation to get off the ground, and have co-authored the white paper with us. We've partnered on the research projects, but also the complaints to the Digital Services Act as well. The willingness of founders to really share their insights with us, share their evidence, and take part as a case study or as a formal complaint to the DSA. We've been so thankful for that as well. And we've approached social media platforms. We've managed to have an open dialogue with 2 platforms so far, and we'd really like to continue that. This is not about us kind of just shouting about what's happening and running away. We really want to work with them and bring to the table the sector that we have united on this issue, and look at how we can solve this together, because as you said, it's not an issue that's going to go away anytime soon.
What's your ultimate vision for censorship?
The vision with the social media platforms is that we do bring about change, that we have a clear indication from them that they want to protect the women's health content, and that they have a way to do that, that they bring in some fairer and more transparent guidelines and improve the moderation practices so that we're not seeing as much content removed or restricted unnecessarily. We'd also look to policymakers to enforce the regulation as best they can. So the Digital Services Act is only a year or so old, and the complaints that we put in are really to test the teeth of it, essentially, and to see what we can do with the regulation. And so we'd really look to that being applied, because that's what it's there for, is to improve the safety and accountability for people that are using the social media platforms and other very large online platforms. And then for this to be part of a way that we can level the playing field for women's health and female founders, because this is a systemic issue that is part of one of other issues within the women's health sector. And I think it's something that we can really practically do something about. I'd also add on that our research has also found that this is not contained simply to social media. Last year, when we held our first roundtable with some founders and charities, we were about halfway through the session, and one of the founders said to us, this isn't just happening on social media, don't you? And we were like, what do you mean? And she said, we were launching a campaign a few months ago, and our payment platform just disappeared, and we had to cancel the launch. And then another founder said that they were told by a very well-known insurance provider that they couldn't be insured because their business didn't fit with the insurer's values. And when they asked for those values, they were told they're not written down, but I can just tell you that you don't align with our values. And they've now had to pay over the odds for business insurance because they've had to find an alternative. And so we were quite shocked to hear this and carried out some further research. And although on a smaller scale, so we spoke to just over 30 businesses, we found that all of them were experiencing issues with securing financial service providers and business admin services, be that bank accounts, business insurance, payment providers, e-commerce platforms. And that could be because they had service denied or were being charged more, or were interrogated more than perhaps a founder in a different industry. And so we've also begun work in this area, and we feel like this is an area that we can really do something practically about. And we have a vision here to create what we're calling the FEMTIC, which is an accredited list of trusted providers that founders in women's health, femtech, and sexual well-being can go to and know that there won't be bias when they're being serviced, and they will know that they have the confidence and the trust in those service providers because they've got policies that don't categorize them as porn adjacent or too risky to do business with, and that they have the cultural openness to understand what women's health is all about and not just discriminate against without, reviewing those businesses.
Hmm. And I think about it, I think, well, bias doesn't stop at the algorithm. It shows up in the billing systems, in the boardrooms, in the bank forms. And, as an investor in women's health, I think this is a really important topic that you're tackling. So thank you so much, Anna, for taking that on. This is very important.
You're welcome. And I think just to end as well on a sort of positive note, if you will, because all of the founders that we've spoken to are not just sitting back and accepting this, they're extremely resilient. So when it comes to marketing, they are still growing their businesses, they are still thriving, they're still succeeding. And I want investors who are listening to not feel that this is another deterrent on the women's health sector, because they are growing their email list, they are building closed communities, they are finding ways around this issue, but we do need to solve it to make the women's health sector grow to the full potential.
Absolutely. I think that resilience is something that we see across the, women's health founders, funders, and across the sector. But you're absolutely right. I think that brings me to another question, which I wanted to talk to you about. What keeps you going?
I think that I put myself in the shoes of several people. So I put myself in the shoes of the solo marketer, because I've been there. I spent 20 years in communications and marketing, often in standalone roles. And I put myself in their shoes as someone that's trying their best to help a small business grow on a really limited budget, on a really impactful business. And they feel like they're doing everything wrong, and they feel like they're failing at their job. And I want them to know that they're not. I also put myself in the shoes of the woman that's turning to social media for information about her health condition. As a mum of two through IVF, I use social media all the time to find out about my symptoms, my treatment plans, to look for a community of other IVF mums. And when certain words are censored or removed, it's really sad that you can't get that information and support that you need. And finally, I put myself in the shoes of the impact-led founder in women's health, who is bringing to potentially millions such an important innovation that can also make a lot of money as well, hopefully, but will have such an impact on so many lives. I'm not, out there as a female founder in health tech or digital health, but this is one area that I can help and do something about.
And finally, I think, what is the one thing that you want every listener to do after this episode?
Please go to Censorship, that's CENSHERSHIP, censorship.co.uk/white paper, that's white paper with a hyphen in the middle, to download our new white paper and learn all about this issue of social media censorship, why it happens, and our recommendations for change. And there you will also find our open letter, which over 500 women's health leaders and supporters have signed so far. And we would love to add your voice to this movement and help to bring about change.
Well, you heard it. Change starts not just with us, but it's through us. We will include all of those details in the show notes. So please head over to the show notes, click the link, and add your voice. Your voice matters a lot. So let's, I will include everything in the show notes for you. Anna, thank you so much for your persistence, for your clarity, and for your refusal to stay quiet and not do something about this. Thank you.
Thanks, Maryann.
As an investor in women's health, I thank you for the work that you're doing. And to everyone listening, I think if this conversation sparks something in you, then please share it. Please go to the show notes. I'm going to repeat that because this is super important, to download the white paper, to add your voice to the open letter, which Anna just mentioned and referenced in our episode today. Now, share this episode with a founder, with a policymaker, with a friend. And of course, hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. This is how we break the silence. This is how we help to make women's health legitimate, to bring it on the table and level the playing field so that women all over the world can get access to the support they need to live a full life. Now, until next time, keep looking for the blind spots. And when you find them, don't look away. See you next time. Thanks, everyone. That's it for this episode of Blindspot Capital. If you learned something, share it. And if you're building something, reach out. And if you're investing in the future, make sure you're not doing it blind.